But there is a family that we have been calling CPS on multiple times. He has 2 kids locked in an outbuilding. They've been in there for days. They're in that with the red door. It's padlocked. Locked with a padlock? Yes, I've seen him open it, say something to the kids, and I watched him lock it back. The kids are locked in there. You can't miss it. It's a red, 2 double doors. They're red. They're locked in that, in the barn.
Deputies say they went to the barn after that 911 call, and that is when they found the 2 teens inside with no access to food, water, a bathroom, bed, and no way out. A couple of hours later, the deputies say these 2 relatives, Donald Lantz and Jeanne Whitefeather, arrived back at the home and were arrested on felony child neglect charges. WSAZ reported that a couple calls were also made on the home at Cheyenne Lane involving abuse of the children that lived there back in May and September. Kanawha County deputies said they investigated those complaints and say the 2 prior ones were unfounded. The 3rd call, however, Donald Lantz and Jeanne Whitefeather were not home, and that is when deputies discovered extreme neglect the children faced.
According to adoption records, Whitefeather and Lantz adopted 5 black siblings from Minnesota in 2018 and moved to Washington State in 2019. It has been the argument from Kanawha County prosecutors that the 2 targeted the children because of their race to use them for forced labor. And according to recent court filings from prosecutors, including pictures from Whitefeather's phone and videos from the surveillance cameras they kept on the children, the alleged abuse started in Washington and was even investigated by the Okanogan County Sheriff's Office and their Department of Children, Youth, and Families for a year before they moved to Kanawha County. According to the filing, they kept them on a large ranch in Washington, denying them bedrooms in the home and forcing them to work outside, where punishments included physical violence or the withholding of food. In 2 instances where 2 of the children tried to run away, the children told investigators Whitefeather would fire her gun at them.
And Mr. Lantz's alleged act of striking the child with the PVC pipe, we know about that only because there's a picture of it on Miss Whitefeather's cell phone, taken from their surveillance cameras that they used in furtherance of all of their other acts to isolate and control the children.
In April of 2023, the 2 moved to Sissonville with the children, where court records say immediately after their arrival, neighbors began making reports to CPS about the children being forced to work on the property, stand for long periods of time, and use a porta potty in the yard. And then ultimately the report of children locked in a barn, which led deputies to the Sissonville home in October 2023, where Lantz and Whitefeather were arrested and later handed a 20-count indictment, including human trafficking, child abuse, and using a minor for forced labor.
They think that conduct in Washington during that 6 or 7 years is intrinsic to their case, and I agree with them. On the other side of that is my client's conduct in response to that is highly relevant and highly probative.
In response, Whitefeather's attorney Mark Plants is hoping to paint a different picture with text messages, medical records, and witnesses at trial that the couple is not racist and did not target or abuse these children. He is not objecting to the use of the Washington records because he plans to use information from Washington too. So does Donald Lantz's attorney John Belinovich, but he is objecting to the use of the Washington abuse investigation since charges were never filed there.
What they're doing is they're trying to take things from these records in Washington to fit their narrative.
Was arrested in the trial of the Sissonville couple charged with 20 counts of child neglect, child trafficking, and forced labor. Jeanne Whitefeather and Donald Lantz were arrested in 2023 after authorities found 2 of their adopted children locked inside a shed on their property. The testimony of the oldest child, now an adult but 16 at the time, she testified about horrible living conditions during their time in Minnesota, Washington, and finally West Virginia. She told the court that while living in Washington and West Virginia, she and her siblings were forced to sleep in sleeping bags on the floor and in tents on a hill near their house. The bathroom was a portable toilet. When asked why they were forced to sleep outside, she said it was because Whitefeather said that they were dirty and stunk. She said they used disposable wipes to try to clean themselves and that they were denied clean clothes. She said their meals were often limited to cereal or waffles with water or juice. If they were working, they would get snacks in place of the meals. There was forced physical labor, she said, including working in a garden without any tools. She told of the time she ran away for 2 days because Lantz hit her because she didn't do what she was told. She said when they arrived in West Virginia, she and her siblings initially lived in a van until police were called. She said after that, they were moved to a bedroom inside the house. She said they often did not have access to food or drink other than peanut butter sandwiches. She said she and her brother were living in the shed for 2 months before the police arrived. During that time, they were only allowed out when she would drag out the camping toilet so it could be dumped. When the police returned in October 2023, she initially did not want to talk with them because she was worried that she would say something to make Whitefeather mad. She also recounted many times that Whitefeather would pepper spray the younger children. During cross-examination, Mark Plants, Whitefeather's attorney, asked if the kids willingly went inside the shed or did anything willingly. She said it was never voluntarily. Jacob Hewitt, a digital forensic examiner from the West Virginia Fusion Center, also testified for the prosecution Friday about photos and text messages on one of the defendant's phones that was confiscated as evidence. He was asked under cross-examination if he knew for a certain who sent those text messages, and he responded that he did not. The phone was confiscated from the Whitefeather by detectives from the Kanawha County Sheriff's Office the day of their arrest in October 2023. Hewitt said on July 3, 2024, Detective Anna Pyle with the Kanawha County Sheriff's Office contacted their lab requesting an analysis of the submitted evidence. We took the digital download into custody and stored it securely, and then the scope we were tasked with, as I mentioned earlier, was to find artifacts relating to child abuse and human trafficking, said Hewitt. Hewitt read off a portion of hundreds of messages from the user of the phone alleged to be Whitefeather's, dating back from July of 2023. The texts were presumed to be a conversation with Lantz. The conversation within the text appeared to be primarily in reference to their 5 adoptive black children, the 2 oldest of whom were found located in a barn on their property in early October 2023. The messages depicted potential evidence of abuse toward the children, often alluding to beating them, locking them up, among other cruel punishments, as well as many times the use of profanity and potential racial slurs, such as referring to them as quote-unquote monkeys. Hewitt pointed out one message in particular that used the word monkey to refer to the children sent on June 14, 2023. The device owner sends another message at about 9:22 p.m. and says, "Your 2 monkeys are so effed up," then follows up to that message and says, "Next time I will pay you to take 4 of them," with a smiling, laughing emoji. Hewitt testified another message sent on June 26, 2023, alluded to more racist language the couple shared between one another in referring to the children. It's a picture of the 3 juveniles who are sitting, and the picture is captioned, quote, "He shows all of the sons of a useless black dude," end quote. On July 7, 2023, Hewitt said that the device owner, alleged to be Whitefeather to Lantz, also alludes to locking the children up. He said the message stated that one of the children was laughing over, quote, "piss head," and then followed that by saying, quote, "Please make sure she's facing away. Wish we had a place to put her." This is in response to the message by the other person who says, quote, "The crawl space might be an option," end quote. In addition, multiple media files were found on the confiscated phone, as well dating all the way back to 2021 and 2022 during the family's time living in Washington prior to moving to West Virginia in the spring of 2023. Some of the media taken at their Washington Ranch residence were videos depicting the oldest boy having what appeared to be a mental breakdown, as well as another video of Lantz sharply berating the children and threatening to hurt them after the oldest boy allegedly tried to hit Whitefeather. The video depicts Lantz yelling and cursing at the boy while he hit a table with a stick. The following media files found on the phone appear to be taken at their Sissonville home in West Virginia at 225 Cheyenne Lane, where they were arrested. One of the files depicts a still image of what looks to be Lantz raising up a PVC pipe towards the oldest boy as if he were about to hit him. Hewitt said he had collected around 1.3 million pieces of data from the confiscated cell phone, which would take about 6 months to actually go through all of it. Another worker from the Fusion Center, Alyssa Ledbetter, a forensic analyst, testified about the finances of Whitefeather and Lantz. Specifically, it was bank statements that were received and prepared for the report that she had made. The report detailed payments that Whitefeather and Lantz received from the Minnesota Department of Management and Budget for Adoption Assistance. For each child, they started receiving payments in 2018. But they stopped May 1st, 2024, 6 months after the kids were taken away.
Well, Anthony, we've spent the better part of the past 2 days in court watching 5 days of home surveillance footage from the cameras that Whitefeather and Lantz kept on 4 of the children. These days all leading up to that October 2nd day when deputies arrived there at the shed. They began knocking on that door before they bust it down. Now, at this point in the evening of October 2nd, 2023, Whitefeather and Lantz are not at the house and have 2 of the kids with them. So when deputies begin knocking at the shed, you see the 2 teens asking what to do next. We even see the teenage girl get in the surveillance camera and seem to try to get the attention of Whitefeather. She then begins talking there to deputies through the door and eventually the CPS worker who shows up. The teenage girl tells them that they are locked in there every day. Eventually, the deputies able to break through the locked door and get the 2 teens out. Eventually, the young girl inside the house in the tarp room is also brought out of the home as police begin to move through the house and shed, and the children are turned over to CPS. Now, after we got through the video, when Whitefeather's attorney Mark Plants cross-examined Detective Pyle, we started to learn some answers to questions we've had since the beginning of this about prior involvement of CPS and law enforcement before the discovery of the kids in the shed. Here is a little bit of what Pyle had to say.
When I first became aware of this in August, I would say in the week to follow, there were a couple attempts made. There was a contact made with a worker once, but there was no further contact to coordinate going and making a visit to the residence together. When you say unanswered to CPS, it was a specific worker.
Okay, that's fair. A CPS worker went unanswered. Is that true?
For some of the attempts at communication, yes.
Now, Plants asked Pyle if a CPS visit was made to the house in May of 2023. Pyle said she didn't know specific dates, but that one CPS visit was made while Whitefeather and Lantz were in Sissonville. Now,
Kay Burdett describes what she says it looked like inside the shed.
I was repulsed, for the lack of a better term. As soon as the door was open, the heat from inside hit us. The smell it made my eyes water.
Burdett says in her testimony that the oldest child told her she lived in the shed.
There was a table and one chair, no running water, no circulating air, no beds. The toilet for the children looked like a hospital pan or like a camping toilet.
Burdett said she found 6 to 7 deep freezers of food in a section of the barn that could not be accessed, and she spotted a 3rd child in dangerous conditions in the window of the home.
I don't believe there was any circulating air in the house either. It was a very nice house. There was hardly furniture in it. Very hot, very, very empty.
but we do want to warn you, some of the footage we've seen in court so far is difficult to watch. It's been 4 days of emotional testimony and hard-to-watch evidence, all leading up to one of the victims, the oldest child, taking the stand on Friday as she detailed years of abuse from Whitefeather and Lantz, taking us all the way to the moment she and her brother were found locked in that Sissonville shed in October of 2023. But it's hard to say where this situation would be today had it not been for the first 5 people who took the stand on Tuesday, the Sissonville neighbors and a home health worker. They immediately noticed in May of 2023 when Whitefeather and Lantz moved in that something was not right and began calling CPS and law enforcement about it.
I was afraid that they would move away and those little kids, nobody would be there to help them.
To the neighbors, it was the children's work in the yard and the standing in a line in all weather that seemed inappropriate for their ages. They said the work never came with any kind of play or break, and one of them even confronted Lantz about it, which he denied, saying that they did play. And then when the neighbors began suspecting that two of them were locked in a shed, it was this October 2nd, 2023 call to the non-emergency line from home health worker Candace Hilbert that brought police to the shed.
He has two kids locked in an outbuilding. They've been in there for days.
And then the jury heard from police officers involved, from the deputy who did the initial check and helped break down the locked shed door to lead investigator Lieutenant Anna Pyle with the Kanawha County Sheriff's Office, who walked us through 5 days of camera footage of the children. Lantz and Whitefeather kept motion-activated Arlo cameras on the children, one in the shed on the 14-year-old boy and 16-year-old girl, and one in a room upstairs with no bed, only a tarp floor that stayed on the 9-year-old girl and 11-year-old boy. The video showed a daily routine of waking up early and being forced to stand with hands on head, unable to change or shower, receiving only peanut butter sandwiches to eat before going back to bed on the floor. In the shed, the teens used a camper toilet, holding a sheet up for each other to shield the other from the camera. Lieutenant Pyle said she first began hearing about this in August before the shed discovery, but testified could never quite get a hold of a CPS worker to follow up.
There was a contact made with a worker once, but there was no further contact to coordinate going and making a visit to the residence together.
The jury saw days of video the Arlo cameras saved, including the moments deputies busted in the door on the shed on October 2nd.
You're okay. You're not in trouble. You're okay.
The children were turned over to Child Protective Services, and when Lantz and Whitefeather got back with two of the children that night, they were later arrested. But that was just the beginning of their charges and the investigation. On Friday, the jury got an inside look at Whitefeather's cell phone. This included text messages between she and Lantz where they referred to the kids as monkeys and pigs. Often Lantz would describe physical punishment, where he said he, quote, knocked one of them. We saw one text where Lantz said, quote, somebody didn't say thank you, and his sandwiches disappeared. We also saw more video from Whitefeather's phone from their time in Washington that also showed yelling and physical abuse from Lantz. A finance expert from the West Virginia Fusion Center, Alyssa Ledbetter, also took the stand on Friday. She broke down the adoption payments Whitefeather and Lantz received from Minnesota. She said in total of what they analyzed from 2019 to 2023, the two received about $318,000 in adoption support payments, but she testified this didn't tell the whole story.
Well, the assistance began in June of 2018, and I only had from June of 2019 to November of 2023, so altogether we're missing about 18 months.
All of this leading up to the most harrowing testimony so far on Friday afternoon from someone who lived it. We were not allowed to film or record the victims who will testify in this case, but were in the room as the teen girl, now 18, but 16 at the time, shared what her life was like both in Washington State and in Sissonville. She said life progressively got worse with Whitefeather and Lantz once they moved to the ranch in Washington in 2019. This is when the outdoor labor began, she said, and the physical punishments that included hits from a PVC pipe. While under a child services investigation there in Washington, eventually they moved to Sissonville, but she did not know why. She talked about how CBS was called soon after they arrived in West Virginia, and she detailed a visit from a worker who stayed on the porch and talked to them through the screen door. The teen testified she was not honest with CPS because Lantz could hear her from where she was standing. Eventually, she and her teen brother, who has several mental health disorders, were locked in a shed in August of 2023. She said she went without a shower for 2 months and never changed clothes. She went from sleeping on a mattress to the floor with a sleeping bag. Her brother slept on the concrete floor with only cardboard at his head. She said she was forced to be his babysitter, but testified he was never the dangerous, violent kid that Lantz and Whitefeather made him out to be. She recalled the use of physical violence, pepper spray, and racial slurs from Lantz and Whitefeather. She recalled also being scared when police arrived at the shed, worried that she would say something to upset Whitefeather. Some of her more emotional moments came during cross-examination by Whitefeather's attorney, Mark Lantz. At one point, he referred to Whitefeather as her mother, and she quickly corrected corrected him. He questioned why some of her interviews before this contradicted what she said on the stand, but when Tuck asked her why she felt comfortable telling the truth now, she said, "Because I know I won't have to go back to that."
Well, lots of big revelations came out when CPS worker Sierra Rabel took the stand, one of them being that there was no follow-up. She said there was no follow-up from the time she visited the house to the shed discovery, and that the worker who took on that case was fired because of it. Now, when you take a look at the video of Rabel taking the stand, it might surprise you when you see that she is taking the stand in an orange jumpsuit. She is currently in jail on an unrelated charges, and she is on administrative leave from CPS. But when she was working for them full-time, she told us she first got a referral about the family in May 2023, shortly after they moved there. She went to visit them on a Friday afternoon, but they weren't home. She left a card. She came back on Saturday, and they weren't home again, so she went on another referral and then got a call from Lantz. She told them she would be back that evening, so she visited the house on May 27th, 2023. She said she saw mattresses, food, and working utilities, and that she also talked to the kids privately.
You're going to want to interview them individually, which I did, and then I did that on their porch for privacy purposes in case there's any disclosures made. That way the parents aren't hearing of disclosures being made. At that time, there were no disclosures made to me, which would indicate a present danger, which is what you're going to look for during when you're on call, is a present danger.
Now, she said after this visit, this case was handed over to another worker, but that there was no follow-up between then and the discovery of the teens locked in the shed. She said this worker was later terminated for not doing so. Now, when we heard her testimony from the teen girl last week, she did recall the visit, but said that when she was taken out onto the porch, she still felt uncomfortable and didn't feel like she could share the truth because she felt like Lantz could hear them. Afternoon, the jury heard from forensic psychologist Dr. Timothy Czar, who looked through CPS and medical records from Washington State for the children. When questioned by Whitefeather's defense attorney Mark Plants, he detailed the mental health conditions that the 14-year-old boy had, which included PTSD and trauma from previous physical and sexual abuse in the biological home and reactive detachment disorder, along with documented episodes of psychosis. He also talked about some of the conditions the other kids had, which included fetal alcohol syndrome and PTSD. This is what the defense has used to say that the two adoptive parents were ill-equipped to deal with all of this and tried to get help.
Children, and so you may do things that to the outside to us look like dumb things to do, but you're trying to do the best you can, and you try to reach out to your community, your mental health professionals, and sometimes you get help, and sometimes because of lack of services, lack of beds, lack of money, you may not always get those services. I do know.
However, when cross-examined using those same CPS records, Assistant Prosecutor Chris Kavranyak points out that there were multiple visits from the 14-year-old boy to the hospital during their time in Washington, visits where he disclosed to workers that he did not want to go home because he was always locked away in his room, forced to use the bathroom and a bucket and eat peanut butter sandwiches. He also disclosed to the workers that he and his siblings were being abused at home. Kavranyak read part of the record that said that there were some concerns from law enforcement and CPS that the kids were being neglected and exploited for the adoption payments they were getting. There was also concern that the 14-year-old was being targeted and that the others were being manipulated by Whitefeather to be afraid of him. The 6-month CPS and law enforcement investigation in Washington was closed just weeks before they moved to Sissonville. Well, after hearing hours of testimony from 3 of the children involved about the abuse and neglect that they endured under the watch of Lantz and Whitefeather, Jeanne Whitefeather took the stand this afternoon and contradicted all of it, painting a totally different picture of what life was like for the kids. Now, though we've heard testimony and seen video that said otherwise, Whitefeather took the stand and first said that the teens were never locked in the shed, that they knew about the key inside and could come and go as they pleased. She even referred to it as a teenage hangout. She said she used cameras on them to keep them safe. Whitefeather also said she never called the children racial names and that she cooked, cleaned, and washed clothes every day for the kids, despite 3 kids telling us they did the cleaning and clothes washing in plastic totes themselves and even went months without changing. The kids also said they got mostly peanut butter sandwiches every day. Well, the kids said they were made to do the farm labor and that Whitefeather stayed inside. Whitefeather said she and Lantz did most of it. She testified that things did get bad when they lived in Washington when it comes to the 14-year-old boy's mental health. She said he was violent and hallucinated and that they got into an altercation in Washington, one where the kids said Whitefeather was the aggressor with a whip. Whitefeather said she never used a whip on her children.
I'm his mommy. I mean, they can disown me, but I will never disown them. As far as I'm concerned, they're my children.
You love all your children.
I love all my children.